So ever since we started making videos on this channel, people have said that raisins are not nutrients. Well, today, they're going to be the main ingredient in a wine. So there. All right, so seriously, we're making raisin wine. And it's kind of surprising how many raisins are going to be in this. So let's just get started and I'll show you what I mean. I have here a 2-pound bag of raisins. And here is about 1 more pound of raisins. This one's been opened before. And I'm putting them into a 1-gallon wide mouth fermenter. Now, I figured this out. I did a little bit of math. Based on the serving size of 40 grams, which is about a 1/4 cup, you get 29 grams of sugars from these raisins. You get a bunch of other stuff too. So the idea that there's no nutrients in raisins, I never quite understood that, because there has to be something or else they wouldn't actually exist, because that's what actually makes up the rest of organic components. But the question is there enough to give yeast what they need to make something drinkable? Give them enough, then probably. In goes 2 pounds of raisins. There's 2 stuck inside. Add 1 more pound of raisins. Now, before anybody asks, these are sun-made California sun-dried raisins. And the actual ingredients are California seedless raisins. There's no extra oils. There's no extra nothing. There's nothing on these. They're just raisins. And someone's going to say, I should have put this in a bucket.
You think?
Here's the problem. If I put it in a bucket, I'll explain in a second. Get out. There we go. And if you think we're being silly, you're right. There wasn't quite a pound in there, so more raisins. Okay. This is what 3 pounds of raisins looks like. This is nuts. I love it though. This is fun. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would I do what I just did and fill it halfway with raisins instead of putting it in a bucket? Well, this is partially as an experiment, because I'm really curious what raisin wine would be like, and partially to prove a point. So the point is that raisins actually do have enough of everything to make a ferment in the right volume. The second is I had to figure out how much sugars are in this versus how much volume of liquid I'm making. And basically, I figured out that raisins are generally about the same as honey as far as their specific gravity. Now, I know that because they take up so much volume, it's probably going to raise that a little bit and this and that. It's okay. Don't even worry about it. This is an experiment. But some things that I did want to add were a little bit of orange. And why orange? Well, citrus just seemed to go well with this. I'm squirting everywhere. And I wanted a little bit more of the rind for some acidity and extra flavors and those oils. Not being really careful about it, as you can tell by Derica's face as I'm squirting her. And what's going to happen is there's not going to be a lot of room for water in here. And we know that. It's okay. We're not going to get a huge yield out of this particular batch. But if you notice, I'm not adding any sugar. This is purely oranges and raisins to create a wine. It's a very old way of making wine. People have been doing it this way for centuries. I'm just really curious to see what it comes out like. Another thing that you might be questioning is, why didn't I cut up the raisins first? I thought about it, and then I realized there's a lot of raisins to cut up. I really didn't want to do it. And you know why I really didn't do it is because most people, when they throw raisins into a brew, they don't cut them up either. So here's what's going to happen. They're going to soak up all this liquid. They're going to swell. This thing's probably going to be full of raisins and orange peel. Okay. And I'm expecting that. I just hope it doesn't blow out the airlock. But what I'm very curious about is how much sugars we can actually get out of these. If we go by the sugars that's actually present, this should be well above the tolerance of bread yeast, Fleischmann's active dry. And not for the reasons you think. This stuff goes to like 11 to 12% ABV for me. So I'm expecting it to go about there, and for this to end on the sweet side, believe it or not. So let me just get started here. What I'm going to do though is add the yeast now, right on top of things. And how much am I putting in? About that much, maybe a teaspoon. maybe a little bit more than a teaspoon. The exact amount is not actually critical because it's really hard to put in too much. The only way I could put in too much is to put about 10 of these worth in there and fill it up with yeast. Then I might have put in too much. But the only thing that's going to happen is I wasted it. It didn't really help me. If I put in too little, though, like just a few grains, there might not be enough viable cells there to create a colony. That's the only real issue. I'm going to fill this with water. It actually took a lot more water than I thought it was going to. This is not quite a gallon, I don't think, but it's close to a gallon. So we're going to end up with a pretty decent amount of liquid from this. I put in the yeast first so that the pouring action of the water mixed it around a little bit because it's going to be rather difficult to stir this fully at this point. And you might be wondering, what are we doing? Yeah, this is just a crazy experiment, okay? Before you do this, wait until you see the final results. This is not something I would say, go ahead and do this. I really want to see if raisins are enough to make a good tasting wine, and how many raisins does it really take to make a good tasting wine? Because that just seems a little bit ridiculous to me.
Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop?
Let's find out. 1, 2, 3, 3.
Another thing we're not going to do is we're not going to take a reading on this. And there's a very good reason for that. There's some sugars on, no, go ahead and put the lid up. There's some sugars on those raisins, okay? And there's a lot of sugars in those raisins and in the orange, but very few of them are in the liquid right now, so a reading would be ultimately meaningless at this point. It just wouldn't mean a thing. But that's why I did some math and I calculated how much sugars are in those raisins. So like I said, per pound of raisins in a gallon of must, it's about 33 points. So just a little bit short of, say, honey, which, you know, to me, that's kind of interesting. And that's why I used 3 pounds, giving me, it'll probably be around a 1.100 or so gravity, which bread yeast can easily ferment out to about 12%, giving a little bit of residual sweetness, and we might just have a beautiful orangey, right, raisiny wine. All right, so here we are just 2 days in, and you can see that it's pretty active. However, this is nothing. That sucker was going to town the first day and into the first morning, and it was kind of crazy, as you can see from this picture right here. Let that be a lesson to you folks. Blow-off tubes, they're a thing. But I wanted you to see a little bit more of what's going on with this guy, and check this out. Look at all those bubbles. Look at how crazy that is inside. And the raisins have all soaked up all that water and created a gap at the bottom because now they're all floating. I think this is going to be a really interesting experiment, and I'm not exactly sure what it's going to taste like when it's done. But so far, it smells like kind of raisiny oranges. It's actually a really, really, really pleasant smell so far. 7 days into our experimental raisin wine, and I'm a little bit concerned. There's some strange things happening here. First, the raisins soaked up all the juice. I mean, all of it. So they just like shot up into the top, and I've had to do the swirl thing and whatever to try to mix this through. I've tried not opening it. Oh my God, it's just getting a little bit crazy. So we're going to go super primitive caveman style brewing here today because I have to get the juice, the liquid, the wine out of this and leave behind all the fruit. So this is kind of a rough rack because I don't want to get rid of all the yeast and the yeast. We don't want to kill the colony, but I want that fruit out of there because it's starting to worry me.
But it's a rough rack plus. Why the plus? Because the raisins have absorbed so much of the liquid that if we just pulled them out, we'd lose
like that much wine.
Most of our juice.
So, we're going caveman today. What I have here is a bucket, just a regular fermentation bucket, 2 gallons, and I have a pretty heavy-duty brew bag in here. What I have to do is just dump this in. Now, I know, oxidization, the whole thing, I know. But I can't really think of many other options because I essentially have to squeeze this bag to let it all in there. My hands have been sanitized. I can touch all this, and I have sanitizer liquid all over my hands.
All this has been sanitized.
Yeah, everything here has been sanitized. So I'm just going to go for it. This just feels wrong to me too, just so you're aware. And it's splashing. Great. It smells like alcohol though.
Oh, yeah, it does.
So So if anybody ever tells you that basically you can't make wine with just raisins because they don't have enough nutrients, they'd be wrong. Because, wow, it worked. Okay, I just want to get all the raisins out. We are not even going to clean this out. See the lees in the bottom of that jar? I want to keep that. So what I'm going to do is just flip this back up. And now, just squeeze this.
That smells like crazy potent.
Yep. Pardon my facial expressions when I do this, because this is not my favorite aspect of this hobby. But this smells strong. We used bread yeast for this, so it's probably anywhere from 10 to 12%. And it could be done already. We are going to take a reading in a few minutes. Okay, my hands have squeezed about as much out of this as I care to do, so we're just going to put this in a bowl. If there's any extra residue, we'll collect that later. But for the moment, I really need to wash my hands. Okay, so here we are. We have about that much liquid in here, which is probably less than a gallon, but it's okay. This is still considered a primary ferment. And just to continue on with the caveman heritage, I'm just going to dump this back in. We're just going to hold it nice and steady and get it all in there. Half gallon. Let's hope that more juice comes out of that, because I was hoping for a little more than a half gallon. But we knew this experiment could go totally weird and crazy. It kind of looks like chocolate milk. What I want to do now is get a reading on it. Now, we didn't take an original gravity reading because how could we? There was no way to really know. So I'm really curious now to know how much sugar is left in here, because the yeast obviously did their thing. It was foaming up, foaming over. It's crazy. But before anybody freaks out that I just dumped it straight in there, remember, this is still a primary fermentation. There's a lot of gases in there. There's a lot of carbon dioxide being given out. In a primary fermentation, you almost can't have too much headroom. All right, this is showing a 1.010 gravity. I have to assume, because we calculated it out, that this should be like a 1.100 to start with. I have to assume that it had to get to at least half those sugars, which means this could be between 6 and 8% right now. It probably won't go much higher because there's not a lot of sugars left in there. But it also makes me wonder, should I just take that bag of raisins and put it back in this fermenter? I believe there's room for it. I don't want to taste this yet. No, I'm lying. I want to. It kind of reminds me of, like, from Firefly, Mother's Milk. It doesn't smell like that should smell at all, but it looks like it. I'm assuming you don't want to try it. Just a guess. Oh, wow. It smells just like pure alcohol. Oh, wow. It tastes like it too. All right. I think it went past 12%. There's no way to know for sure, but there wasn't enough sugars there. It might be 12, 13%. It's very bitter. It's extraordinarily dry, which I didn't actually expect to happen. So it's probably close to being done. So I don't think any more sugars are going to come out. I'm just going to put this back in and we'll go from there. But I got to finish this now because I can't put it back. Okay, the second sip was slightly better.
It's like whiskey. You have to get acclimated.
Yeah. Strong, though. Very interesting flavor. It's got the orangish, like I taste the orange. I made a fermented orange juice once, and it was kind of nasty and disgusting. It was one of the few things that I've ever actually tossed out, only to learn later on that I probably should have just let it sit for about a year, and it would have been much better. This has some of that going for it, which is not necessarily a good thing. I did not enjoy that one at all. I'm just going to dump that back in. And now, let's see if I can get any more out of this, since it's been sitting for a minute. I don't really think there's all that much to get out of this bag anymore. A few drops. As we said, I'll put a lid on it, put it away for a while, and see what happens. This is just one of those weird experiments that I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I've heard of making raisin wine before. What?
Is this a lot of headroom? Yes.
If it was secondary.
It's still a lot of headroom, but because it's still working, we can see the foam line, we can see the airlock pressure changing, and we know that the full colony is still in there. We're not overly concerned about it.
Nah, in primary, headroom really doesn't matter. I don't like to leave this much headroom, but it's more a personal preference. There's really no danger to it, as long as this is still actively fermenting, which I believe it actually still is. Plus, I just shook it up a little bit. Some bejesus came out, and now it's, kind of filling up the space. So any oxygen that introduced should have been pushed out. Being that this is probably past 10% ABV, I don't think it's going to make vinegar either. But it's going to go sit for a while and see just what it does at that point. So
It's going to go in a corner and think about what it's done.
yeah. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.